Blair had already gotten quite a bit of dancing time out of the actual dance. In fact, in retrospect, she looked absolutely ridiculous. She didn't even recognize anything she was dancing to. She was just grooving back and forth to the beat, trying to match whatever Andre was doing. Andre, though modest in setting expectations, picked up the rhythm as soon as they were in the crowd of people. Blair needed to cool down after watching all that, so she jumped at the idea of taking pictures first when Amanda suggested it. That way it was all taken care of, and she could focus on other things the rest of the night. It was a bit surreal, actually. The photographer was set up in the choir and drama rehearsal room on the second floor. In the hallway, they could still hear the music coming through the floor and walls from the ballroom below. They were in a pretty good position in line. There were only a few groups ahead of them. A lot of people were making the same wise choice of getting pictures before the meals came. Blair and Andre were at the back of the line, behind Elise and Raph, and the others from their limo. A few minutes after they arrived, a second group lined up behind them. It was composed mostly of other juniors. Two of them in particular had gotten a lot of attention during the dance, Melissa Levitt and Liam Connolly. On the list of fellow juniors that Blair talked to, they were probably right down at the very bottom. Melissa was this obnoxious creature of plastic and silicone who never really seemed to have a nice word for anyone. It made a lot of sense that everyone else in their group looked miserable too. Liam Connolly was famously high and mighty, too good for the rest of them, let alone the school as a whole. This was less annoying than Melissa, who did think she was above it all, but was also vainglorious enough that she needed everyone else to acknowledge her superiority. Neither of their dates seemed to be taking any pleasure in their company either. Melissa's date, Ryan Lewis, was zoned out, looking through his phone. Meanwhile, Anne Kirkpatrick kept staring at the back of Liam's head, expecting him to talk to her. Behind them were Laura Nakano and this other kid Blair had seen around. She couldn't place the name. Neil, maybe? He must have been Laura's date because they were the only two wearing some kind of weird period piece cosplay. Laura was particularly cross, giving off this body language like she had caught Neil kissing someone else. That's when it came to Blair. Laura was on the student council. She was dressed that way because the theme might have been her idea, and the junior class completely bombed in the competition. Blair didn't remember voting for anyone when they did the prince-princess thing in homeroom a few weeks back, but if she did, it definitely wasn't for Liam or Melissa. Neither of them looked like they would either give a damn or be capable of succeeding at the Spirit Week games. That proved to be true. To them, it looked like torture having to perform at all. They couldn't just stand there and look cool and have everyone love them. The Neil guy standing next to Laura seemed to be in a bad mood mostly because she was. He was now at the back of the line instead of Andre. Occasionally, he would open his phone or try to say something to Laura, but she would give a clipped response and go quiet again. No one in their group was really speaking to each other at all. It was funny because they hadn't even announced the homecoming royalty yet, but Liam and Melissa already seemed to know that they would lose. After another few minutes, everyone shifted forward. The line was bending around a corner now, so they were actually closer to the people in the back. That's when another group showed up behind Neil. It was a bunch of jocks and their dates. One jock in particular couldn't be ignored, because he was always so damn loud. Joe Torelli was chatting up the other varsity football guys, talking about some random nonsense that she didn't pay attention to. Among the group was Jimmy O'Shaughnessy, the prince of the party palace himself. Upon seeing him, Paxton cut out of line and walked up to him. The boys greeted each other with some kind of dude-bro chest bump thing, and Paxton let him know that their limo of 10 would be on the way over after the dance. Blair couldn't believe how real everything felt. She was like a vampire that had been cured, stepping out into sunlight for the first time in ages. She glanced up at Andre, who had been listening to something that Raph was telling him. A slight sense of guilt ran through her. Does Andre really know what she had gotten them into? What if she was rushing this? Would that make him feel uncomfortable? Could that mess up chances for them down the road? You haven't even kissed yet, a nagging voice repeated from the back of her mind. That's right, Blair thought to herself. One step at a time. As Paxton walked back to Amanda, the broken-up huddle of varsity jocks revealed who one of the girls was. It was Jennifer Maxwell, the senior class princess. She had been a killer in the competition during Spirit Week. She was one of the cheerleaders and had done some other sports too, if Blair remembered correctly. She probably had the best chance of winning Homecoming Queen, in Blair's opinion. Even though she was a peppy cheerleader type, she wasn't a bitch like a lot of the others that ran in those cliques. That alone put her above Melissa Leavitt. Blair had chosen differently, though. From what little she paid attention to the social Olympics that was Homecoming, one thing had stood out to her. The adorable sophomore couple tugged at her heartstrings just a little bit. Blair had a hard time not picturing herself and Andre when Chelsea kissed Greg on stage. Her thoughts were interrupted by an obnoxious jock voice. She noticed Joe Torelli take a few steps toward them. He was standing in the crook of the hallway now, addressing everyone that had lined up around the corner. "Isn't that right, everyone?" he said, continuing some conversation he was having. "We've got a knockout winner on our hands." Joe Torelli gestured toward Jennifer, who was now hiding her face in her hand. Her date looked pissed. "What about you, new guy?" Joe said, taking a step toward Andre. "You voted for Jenny, didn't you?" "Of course," Andre said in a calm tone. Joe's eyes then dropped to Blair. There was a reason Joe was quarterback of the Jaguars. They might not win every game, but Joe was a slab of solid muscle. If he didn't play football, he probably could have succeeded in any other sport he set his mind to. He had that kind of body, and that kind of focus. Except for now, that is. The first thing Blair noticed when they locked eyes was how bloodshot his were. He had dark eyes, which usually made him look very expressive contrasted against the white. Now, though, there were so many visible veins creeping in from the edges that he looked like he just needed to sleep for like 12 hours. He probably hadn't slept at all the night before, after blowing the homecoming game. "And you?" he asked. "You voted for Jennifer too?" Yeah, Blair agreed. She desperately wished she could put on a poker face like Andre. Luckily, Joe's critical thinking was severely impacted at the moment, and he accepted her answer at face value. While everyone was a bit dumbstruck by what Torelli was doing, two people at the front of the line were already making fun of the situation. "I was going to vote for her," Jeremy said, although not directed at Joe. It was just quiet enough that everyone could hear. "But my vote got intercepted." Something cracked inside of Torelli, and the crazed smile disappeared from his face, turning into a snarl. Mark Schlesinger, who Jeremy was actually addressing, was laughing to himself. The two continued their back and forth at a slightly lower volume, seemingly unaware of the fury building inside of the quarterback. Blair felt something touch her stomach and almost jumped in surprise. It was Andre's arm. He was nudging her back toward the wall. She complied without hesitation. Andre now stood between the two of them, even though Joe's anger was clearly directed at Jeremy. Before anything could happen, one of the other girls stepped up and put a hand on Joe's chest. It was apparently his date. She pulled him gently to the back of the line. It took 5 full seconds before he would take a step backwards, relenting to her. None of the other jocks said anything to Joe. He just stood there at the back while his date rubbed his chest a bit, trying to calm him down. Once it seemed like the tension had passed, Andre turned back toward Blair. "Well, that was fun," he said in a quiet voice. "It's a good thing you voted for Jennifer," Blair whispered back. Andre reached into his pocket, revealing 2 blank voter cards. "I've only been here a few months," he said. "Didn't think I knew any of them well enough." "Maybe you could have spent more time getting to know them," Blair offered. "My time's better spent elsewhere." He smiled at her. After an uneventful few minutes, it was finally their turn for photos. They did the couple shots first. Jeremy and Dina posed, then Mark and Raquel, then Paxton and Amanda. Following them, Elise and Raph were up. They took 2 normal shots, followed by a silly one where Raph had materialized 2 pairs of hip-hop style sunglasses like they were posing for a Billboard magazine spread. Andre stepped up to the photographer's assistant. "So, standard package," the man explained. "You get 3 final shots right away, as well as access to the touched-up files next week, once those have been edited. Everything will have that nice, professional look. You're guaranteed the digital files with your purchase to do with as you wish, but there is the caveat that they will be in the yearbook as well, so just be aware of that." The guy motioned to something he'd had Andre download as he was paying for the pictures. "They'll be on our app as soon as you walk out of here," he explained. "You can download them whenever you want. Then, tonight, or tomorrow, or next week, you can pick out the prints or commemorative items you'd like to order." Andre looked down at Blair. "Sounds good," she agreed. "We'll take it." Raph and Elise were looking at a computer screen, confirming their shots for the photographer. Blair pulled the makeup clamshell out of her purse to make any necessary touch-ups. She certainly didn't want to leave that completely in the hands of the photographers. "So, what do you want to do for poses?" Andre asked. Blair thought for a moment, then settled on 3 she really liked. Following the flashes, she and Andre reviewed the little screen. The first was fairly standard. Blair put her left hand on his chest, accenting the pink chrysanthemums of their corsage and boutonniere. They added the right flare of color to the center of the frame. For the other 2, she wanted to have a bit more personality. In the second shot, Andre was leaning her back, with her left hand on his arm. It was like a pose taken in the middle of a waltz. Finally, a bit of a sillier, if somewhat conventional shot. She was taking hold of his tie and pulling him down to her level. "Perfect," Andre said, more than happy with how they'd turned out. With that done, the other couples came back into frame. They posed for a picture with all 10 of them. Because of his height, the photographer placed Andre and Blair in the center. Elise and Raph were on one side of them, and Amanda and Paxton were on the other. It was the Burks paying for the shot, after all. With that done, they filed out into the hallway to return to the ballroom. As they passed by, Blair caught a glance at Joe Torelli. He was no longer at the tail end of the line, but he noticed them regardless. He eyed the group until they were totally out of view. Blair sighed. She really wished Jeremy had kept his mouth shut.